Right, so get this, we're going deep today into ancient Greek philosophy, and we're looking at someone you might not know as well as like his super famous uncle Plato.
Oh, intriguing.
Right, it's Speusippus,
Yeah.
Plato's nephew, and the thing is he actually took over the academy after Plato died.
Wow.
Yeah, but here's the kicker. He actually disagreed with some of Plato's most, like, fundamental ideas.
That's juicy. Some philosophical family drama.
I know, right? Talk about awkward family reunions. But, so we're using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy as our guide today.
Excellent source.
It is, it is. And we're going to unpack his ideas, which honestly sometimes are a little perplexing, I'm not going to lie.
Well, that's part of the fun, right?
Exactly. So he led the academy after Plato, but diverged on some really big ideas.
Yeah, like think core beliefs, foundational stuff.
Yeah, he flat out rejected the theory of forms.
Huge. That was like Plato's signature theory.
I know, the bedrock of Platonic thought, and Speusippus was just like, nope, not buying it.
So what did he embrace instead?
He turned to math, believed numbers were the key to understanding reality.
Interesting. Why the shift, though? What issues did he have with the forms?
Well, it seems like maybe he was looking for something more, like, grounded and maybe even scientific.
Ah, so the forms were maybe a little too, I don't know, ethereal for him.
Yeah, too abstract, too eternal,
Hmm.
maybe not connected enough to the world we actually experience.
Right, right. And numbers, they offer that tangibility.
Exactly. Like a more, like, solid system, a way to see the structure of reality.
Makes sense. So ditching the realm of perfect forms, and instead we have reality built on math, on the inherent order of numbers.
Exactly. And, this leads us to his idea of an episodic universe.
Okay, now we're talking.
Right. It's like a universe built in layers, almost like a cake.
I love a good cake analogy.
Right. Each layer with its own special ingredients, and they don't really mix.
Okay, walk me through this.
So imagine 4 layers, each with its own set of rules, operating independently.
4 layers, all right.
At the base, you've got numbers. That's the foundation.
The bedrock.
Then you go up a level, and you get magnitudes.
So things like size, shape, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Then, another layer up, we've got souls.
Okay, I'm getting a little more abstract now.
I know. And then finally, at the top, the perceptible world.
The stuff we can actually see and touch.
Exactly. So each layer is like self-contained. What happens in one doesn't really affect the others.
So like no cause and effect between the layers?
Yeah, pretty wild, right? Even back then, people were like, wait, what?
I bet. It kind of sounds like a fragmented view of reality.
It does. And Aristotle actually compared it to a bad tragedy, one where things just happen randomly with no real connection or flow.
Ouch. That's a harsh critique.
Yeah, Aristotle didn't hold back. But for Speusippus, this layered structure, it let him explore these different levels of being without reducing everything to a single principle.
I see. So he wanted to maintain those distinctions between realms?
Yes, exactly. But then the big question is where did it all begin? The source of these layers, where did everything come from in his view?
Right, right. Gotta have a starting point.
He called it the one, and it existed alongside another principle called plurality.
Okay, the one and plurality, like two sides of a coin.
In a way, yeah. They were the building blocks of his whole system, especially when it comes to numbers.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So how did he see these principles in action, especially with numbers?
Well, he focused on mathematical numbers, which means there's multiple versions of each number. Like we can add 2 and 2 to get 4.
Right, right. Makes sense for math.
But the one is outside of all that. It's a source of numbers, not a number itself.
Okay, so it's not just a starting point for counting, but for everything, for existence.
Precisely.
Yeah, it's like the one kicks off the whole numerical party, but doesn't actually dance.
I like that analogy. The one is the cosmic DJ. So it's transcendent outside the system it creates.
Exactly. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky, because there's been this debate about Speusippus's one and whether it was like a precursor to the Neoplatonic concept of the one.
Ah, so even more layers to unpack.
Right, because the Neoplatonic one, that's a whole other level of abstract. It's seen as this principle beyond being.
Right beyond existence itself. So how do we reconcile these interpretations of Speusippus's one?
Honestly, it's a bit of a head-scratcher. We're working with limited sources here. Not a lot of Speusippus's own writing survived.
Ah, the joys of ancient philosophy.
Oh.
Always piecing together fragments.
Right. We have to rely on accounts from other philosophers, and they don't always agree. Like, there's this passage, it's in a Latin translation of Proclus's commentary on Plato's Parmenides, and it hints at a connection to the Neoplatonic one.
Interesting. So maybe a link there.
Maybe, but even that's debated. Some scholars think it's a stretch, others say it's a solid connection. And then we have Iamblichus, who wrote this book called De Communia Mathematica Scientia.
Another piece of the puzzle.
Right. There's a chapter in there that seems to line up with what we know about Speusippus, but again, how much can we rely on it? It's tough to say for sure.
So a bit of a mystery remains. But what's clear is that Speusippus was wrestling with some big questions about like the origins of the universe, the nature of reality, even if we don't have all the answers neatly laid out.
Absolutely. He was a deep thinker, grappling with profound
They're
concepts.
sure. But before we get too lost in those cosmic origins, I got to ask about his fascination with the number 10.
Ah, yes, his numerical
He
obsession.
even wrote a whole book about it, right?
That's what we hear, at least according to a source called the Theologomena Arithmeticae. Speusippus seems to have had this deep reverence for 10, calling it perfect because of its special mathematical properties.
Perfect. Okay, I'm curious. What made it so special mathematically?
Well, he saw it as this culmination of numerical progression. Like, it contained all the different types of numbers within it.
All types. Wow, give me some examples.
Sure, like odd and even, prime and composite, linear, square, and cubic. He saw it as this like microcosm of numerical order, a reflection of the bigger picture.
So for him, 10 was like this perfect embodiment of his whole worldview, a model for how everything fit together.
Exactly. And it's interesting how he was so focused on abstract math, but also had this real interest in the natural world.
Right. Like classifying plants and animals.
Exactly. He wrote books on it titled Definitions and Likes. Definitely more than a hobby for him.
So is this like his scientific side coming out? Was it connected to his philosophy?
Oh, definitely. He believed that true knowledge involved seeing the big picture, how everything is interconnected.
Okay, so classifying plants and animals wasn't just about categorization, but like uncovering the underlying order of the natural world.
Precisely. He was like an ancient Greek taxonomist, but maybe with a philosophical twist.
I like that, a philosophical taxonomist. But did he use the same methods as Aristotle for classification?
Well, that's a good question. There's some evidence that suggests he might have used different criteria, focusing on things like habitat or behavior.
Interesting. So not just an organism's essential nature like Aristotle focused on.
Right, so maybe a bit more emphasis on how an organism interacts with its environment.
So a bit of a rebel even in his scientific pursuits, always forging his own path. Which makes me wonder, how did he see the whole process of acquiring knowledge? Did he think we learn through our senses primarily, or was it something more?
He had this really fascinating take on knowledge, especially when it came to math. He believed that mathematical truths weren't about the physical world we perceive, but about this eternal, unchanging realm.
So math wasn't just a tool for him, it was like a window into a deeper reality.
Exactly. He was a mathematical realist, meaning he saw math as describing a truer reality than the one we experience with our senses.
So how did we access these mathematical truths, according to him?
Through intuition. He believed we could directly grasp these truths, like they just presented themselves to our minds as self-evident.
So it wasn't just logic and reasoning, it was like an intuitive leap.
Right, like a direct connection to this eternal realm of mathematical objects. He even said that mathematical axioms, those starting points of reasoning, they fawned on the soul.
Fawned on the soul? That's a beautiful image. It's like our minds are naturally attuned to mathematical truth.
Exactly. Now, moving beyond math, what about ethics? What did Speusippus have to say about how we should live, about happiness, about virtue?
Right, because math can only get you so far in life.
Well, like many ancient philosophers, he believed happiness was the ultimate goal, but he had a unique perspective on it.
Okay, I'm all ears.
He wasn't a hedonist. He didn't think happiness was about pleasure like Eudoxus believed.
So what was it about then?
He saw happiness as a state of completion, a kind of perfected state of our natural condition. He even used this word aklesia, which suggests a lack of motion or agitation, a state of stillness and tranquility.
So not about chasing fleeting pleasures, but about cultivating a deeper sense of inner peace and harmony.
Exactly. He saw it as something enduring, not something fleeting and dependent on external circumstances.
Right.
Like finding that solid ground within yourself. It wasn't just about being undisturbed. It was about actively building those qualities that make a good life, a flourishing life, you know?
So he was saying virtue's its own reward, almost. But how do you square that with the fact that good people, people who try to do the right thing, they still suffer sometimes? Like life isn't always fair.
That's a really good point, and it's something that philosophers have been trying to figure out forever. The thing is, we don't have anything from Speusippus himself that directly tackles that, so we're left guessing a bit.
Ah, the mysteries of ancient philosophy. So what do you think? What might he have said?
Well, it's possible he thought that virtue gave you a sort of inner strength, you know, like armor that could help you get through tough times.
Like a philosophical shield deflecting all those bad vibes.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because that idea echoes what the Stoics would say later about finding peace in the middle of struggles.
Right, right. But Speusippus wasn't totally dismissive of the outside world, was he? Like, he acknowledged that things like health and wealth, they do matter too, right?
He did. He wasn't like a total ascetic saying you got to ignore your material needs completely. It seems like he understood that those things could either help or hurt your happiness, even if they weren't the ultimate goal in themselves.
So it's about recognizing those external factors, but not letting them be the main drivers.
Exactly. And that's where you really see Speusippus wrestling with how complicated it is to be human. He wasn't going for easy answers. He was trying to get a really subtle, nuanced view of what it means to live well.
He was committed to the process, to the search itself.
Absolutely. A true philosopher, always digging deeper. And it's kind of amazing how these ideas he was working with over 2,000 years ago, they still speak to us now.
They do. Like this idea of balance, cultivating virtue, finding that inner peace that can weather any storm. It's all super relevant to how we live today.
It is. Speusippus might not be a household name, but his insights into the human condition are timeless.
Mhm.
And by exploring his philosophy, we're not just looking at ancient history, we're finding ideas that can help us deal with the complexities of our own lives.
So what do you think? If we could like pluck Speusippus out of ancient Greece and drop him into today's world, what would he make of it all?
Oh, that's a great question to ponder. Given his focus on balance and harmony, I have a feeling he might be a bit wary of how fast-paced everything is today. All the distractions, the constant chase for more stuff.
He might even see a connection between our obsession with technology and that hedonistic chase for pleasure he was so against.
Sure. Like maybe we've just swapped out one form of excess for another.
But perhaps we could all use a little dose of Speusippus in our lives, help us find that equilibrium.
I think that's a brilliant takeaway from our deep dive today. Speusippus reminds us that real happiness comes from within, from cultivating that inner virtue and finding a sense of harmony both in ourselves and with the world around us.
Words to live by for sure. Well, that wraps up our exploration of Speusippus. It's been a real journey into some fascinating and thought-provoking ideas. We hope you enjoyed it.
And who knows, maybe this will inspire you to seek out other hidden gems of philosophy, thinkers who went against the grain and pushed the boundaries of what we know.
Keep that curiosity alive, folks. Thanks for joining us.